The Democracy That Delivers podcast is brought to you today by the Anti-Corruption and Governance Center at CIPE. This is the podcast where we talk about corruption in its many forms. And now to your host.
Hello, everybody. My name is Frank Brown, and I head up the Anti-Corruption and Governance Center here at CIPE. I'm very pleased today to welcome a special guest, one of CIPE's longest partners in Indonesia, Pak Erry Riyana Hardjapamekas, who's the chairman of Indonesia's private sector collective action coalition against corruption, which we know by its acronym in Bahasa KAKI. We are very, very happy to have with us as a first-time co-host Cynthia Gabriel, who's from the neighboring country of Malaysia, where she is based in Kuala Lumpur as a senior anti-corruption advisor for CIPE, the Center for International Private Enterprise. By way of background, Pak Erry is a former commissioner with one of the world's most powerful anti-corruption commissions. He was one of the first commissioners, and that's the Commission for the Eradication of Corruption, which is based in Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia. And he's also been for years a leader of the Indonesia Institute for Corporate Directorship, which has had a long-time partnership with CIPE in Indonesia. And we're speaking to Pak Erry today because the collective action effort in Indonesia against corruption by the private sector, KAKI, is really largely due to his vision for a way to engage the private sector in Indonesia in a fight against corruption, where the private sector adheres to voluntary standards and agrees to uphold those standards and ultimately is audited for upholding those standards. And at CIPE, we've found that to be one of the most effective ways to fight corruption, by engaging the private sector and by holding them accountable for the promises they make when it comes to anti-corruption measures. So we're really privileged to have him with us today, not only because we don't hear enough voices from Asia in how to fight corruption, but also because this is a novel approach to collective action that is picking up more and more momentum globally, including in Europe and Eurasia and in Africa. But Asia has always been the center of gravity for that movement. So Pak Erry is not only been recognized within Indonesia for his leadership, both on the corporate level, where he's headed up private entities, including a large tin mining company, as well as played a leadership role on state-owned enterprises. He's not only known within Indonesia for this role in fighting corruption, but also globally. And that became especially apparent last November when he was chosen and KAKI was chosen to win the Anti-Corruption Excellence Award. And that was awarded in Qatar in November of last year during the World Cup. And one of the nice sort of dividends, the nice benefits of receiving that award was getting to attend a World Cup match as a guest of the Qatari government. So with that, I'll stop talking so much and get to our guest, who is one of, in my opinion, one of the most articulate and visionary anti-corruption activists in Indonesia. So I want to start off, Pak Erry, with a question just about that award and get a sense of how getting that award, being chosen and recognized for KAKI's work in Indonesia, how this has boosted the international exposure and helped get more and more companies to join the organization, to join the KAKI collective action effort there in Jakarta. What was it like to be there and get that award?
This award, it is a recognition of our work. I was in Doha at that time to receive the award. Among many other excellent individuals winning the Anti-Corruption Award, we are the only initiative that focuses on anti-corruption in the business sector. This serves as a call and reminder that we, as a business community, have a significant role to play in getting the government to stop asking for a bribe and for corrupt behavior to become an unacceptable practice in society.
And Pak Erry, if you don't mind, could you describe a little bit exactly what KAKI is and what it does, just by way of background, and then I'll turn the microphone over to Cynthia to dig in a bit on that.
Okay. KAKI is a platform for the business and private sectors to share experience among them in order to make one clear, um, what they call that, behavior on anti-corruption. Stop bribing and don't be bribed as well, and how to communicate with regulators and government in establishing their um, policies in which that could relate to anti-corruption efforts.
Super. That's a great overview. And I'll turn the microphone over to Cynthia, who I think may dig in a little bit about how many companies are involved and what companies get, the risk they face, that sort of thing.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor, Pak Erry, to be able to interview you today. How exactly did you find yourself in this role at KAKI, given your illustrious career in the corporate sector? Can you please describe your professional background for the benefit of everyone? Maybe you could start with your tenure as a CEO of a large tin mining company and how that actually led you to anti corruption work in the private sector.
Okay, thank you, Cynthia. I have spent about 40 years working in the area of anti-corruption. Due to my experience in business, I have devoted the majority of my efforts to raising ethical standards among professionals and in the executive management and financial functions. I work in several companies focused on improving corporate governance standards, as I believe integrity and ethics are key for business to flourish. So back in 2003, I was honored to win the Bung Hatta Anti-Corruption Award, an award dedicated to an Indonesian figure who is known for being clean from corrupt practices and who plays an active role in inspiring or influencing society in the anti-corruption movement. Then I finished my term as CEO of tin mining companies, state-owned companies, one of the biggest tin mining producers in the world. And then I worked as KPK commissioner and was involved directly in the prosecution of corruption cases. As one of the first commissioners after Indonesia established anti-corruption law enforcement, we managed and developed KPK from 4 or 5 employees to hundreds within 4 years. My career experience working with companies was very useful, of course, as I knew the HR management, strategic management systems, organization culture, and all the details of the organization. So it makes it easier to set up standard operating procedures, for example, and internal regulations. So my background helped me to prepare for establishing KPK. After my term was over, I continued to work in the anti-corruption movement. I joined the Indonesian Society for Transparency, and then also one of the founders of the Transparency International Indonesia, and also helping the government, civil society, and foundations with education, ethics, transparency, good governance, and anti-corruption. And beside of that, I was the head of the founding team of the Secretariat of Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative Indonesia, a member of the board of Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative in Oslo, Norway, and a member of the Independent Joint Anti-Corruption Monitoring and Evaluation Committee, the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, member of the Selection Committee for KPK Commissioners in 2010, 2011, and 2014, as well as founder and now the board member of the Indonesia Transparency Society, a founder of Indonesia Institute for Corporate Governance, chief of founding board Center for the Study of Governance, cooperation between the University of Indonesia and the Hills Governance Center, CSIS, Washington, D.C., founder of Transparency International Indonesia, as mentioned earlier, and also now a founder and chairman of Advisory Committee of the Coalition Anti-Corruption Indonesia, Coalition Action Against Corruption in Indonesia.
That is really very, very illustrious and very elaborate. And only a man that has so much vision and who's so versatile will be able to carry all these different roles so successfully. I just have one more question before I pass it on to Frank, is to also describe perhaps your major achievements in doing work along anti-corruption in the private sector. Can you describe a very outstanding achievement, something you have been very proud of?
Very difficult. I think to mention one of them is extractive industry transparency initiative. We mobilize all the oil and gas and mining companies to gather and to agree on the transparency initiative standards and how to join this movement. And then we were accredited as one of the countries that applied this extractive industry transparency initiative. I think that's the one of some of the achievements.
Pak Erry, one of the things that's really interesting to me is the fact that you were, if I understand correctly, among the first group of commissioners for the KAPK, the Commission for the Eradication of Corruption. Is that right?
Yes, 2003, 2004. I was one of the five commissioners, the first batch of commissioners of KPK.
So, it's just hard for me to sort of even imagine what that must have been like. So here you are in a very large, economically developed, significant country, which has big corruption problems. You come from the corporate elite, right? You'd headed up a private company, and there you are trying to transition this country as the head of an agency that not only has investigative powers but also enforcement powers and can issue judgments against entities and people who've been engaged in corruption. So it's really putting you on the edge of a very, what seems to me, tense situation, right? Because you're trying to fundamentally change how society works. Can you describe a little bit what that was like, just personally?
This is very interesting times at that time, but organization in general is the same, the public and private sectors. I think the basic principle of those two areas are almost the same. So what we set up for the first time is how to establish a strong organization culture, which is based on the integrity and ethics values and all those noble virtues that we have to adapt and to implement. I think that's the first thing we established at the time. And then number two is the challenge that we face, as also faced by all law enforcement agency on the corruption, on the anti-corruption agency, is the public expectation. And how to manage public expectation is the most difficult task. The remaining are almost the same standards as organizations. So, Frank, that's those things that I thought very difficult in establishing KPK in the first 4 years.
Yeah, and just for the listeners to give you a sense of background, at least when I have visited the KPK in Jakarta in the past, there are actually sometimes protesters outside the KPK to defend the KPK. So that's to Pa Erry's point about managing the expectations of the people of Indonesia. Their expectations are quite high. The KPK is a beloved institution, and people are literally willing to put their, stand physically in front of that building, the KPK headquarters, to protect it, which is, in my experience, extraordinary and speaks, I think, Pa Erry, to your leadership as one of the first commissioners.
Yes, Frank, that's part of the how to manage public expectations. So we agreed upon that that kind of protest should be considered as vitamin or supplement, the additional spiritual support from public. The key in facing that kind of protest is transparency. Once we transparent, that the protesters could be managed properly. I think that's the key words of how to cope with those protests. And after first year and second years, we are used to face that kind of protest.
So when we're talking specifically about KAKI, which again for the listeners is a first ever effort in Indonesia to get together large Indonesian companies that have pledged to uphold a certain anti-corruption standard, get them together collectively um, to uphold the standard, to be audited for their upholding the anti-corruption standard, and this is where it gets interesting, Pa Erry, to then play a really unique role in society. So, if you don't mind a little bit, Pa Erry, talking about your vision for what this collective action effort, KAKI, will become.
Okay, Frank. There are three-pronged pillars on the movement on anti-corruption. Public, which is government. Government means legislative and executive, as well as what we call that, judicial. And then private sector, and the third one is civil society. So we want together as part of business communities to create a clean business environment. Okay, we are one of the three pillars. Yeah, and KAKI will be a great platform to uplift the compliance standards of private sector companies, develop a critical mass of companies dedicated to clean and transparent business practices, and with the government co-create change in public services to enhance efficiency, transparency, and accountability. So, in brief, as one of the three pillars, we want to strengthen our force in order to support the anti-corruption movement that the government is uh, implementing. And in the past 2 years, KAKI has grown significantly, surprisingly, in Indonesian business community. We collaborate with businesses, trade associations, regulators to produce anti-corruption standards that are adapted to the needs of the Indonesian private sector on a regular basis. So our goal is to build KAKI as a trustworthy business community where members of the KAKI network can share best practices in anti-corruption compliance, assist businesses in advancing their voices to the authorities, and provide training and technical assistance to business interested in adopting KAKI's anti-bribery standards, and then the assessment and the audit of private companies who adopted the standards.
Do you see any big challenges coming ahead for this job, Pak Erry?
Yes, of course, Cynthia. The on how to convince private sectors and business communities that this is our common interest. Corruption is our common enemy, and we have to gather together, and we have to have a coalition in order to combat corruption from our sides, not only to combat corruption within bureaucracies, but also corruption which might be happening in our own companies as well. So that's the challenges, how to convince them. And so far, in the past 2 years, KAKI has been recognized nationally and globally. We invited more than 50 companies so far to join the alliance, maybe now more than that. 11 have already signed up, and more are in the process of joining and KAKI has also been recognized by the coordinating minister for economy, Minister Erlangga Hartarto, and as well as Minister of Cooperatives and Small and Medium Enterprises. And both ministers play a key role in the business world, and it is an honor for KAKI to be recognized by both of them. And also, a memorandum of understanding is now being negotiated between KAKI and KPK. KAKI's reputation grew as a result of media coverage and involvement with major news outlets in Indonesia, including prime TV channels, CNBC Indonesia, Investor ID, and Management Magazine, among others. And we also have been recognized as the first business anti-corruption initiative and have been invited to many prominent events in the business and anti-corruption sectors. For example, we have been appointed to one of the board committees of the Indonesia Anti-Corruption Collective Action established by the Indonesian Global Compact Network, a UN initiative. And KAKI is also listed in the Basel Institute B20 Collective Action Hub database under the name Collective Action Against Corruption in Indonesia, as well as winning the Anti-Corruption Excellence Award that I have been presented earlier.
One more question from me before I hand it over to Frank. This Koalisi Anti-Korupsi Indonesia, KAKI, is blazing the trail on anti-corruption efforts in Indonesia. What kind of future do you see as Indonesia's economy is growing from strength to strength?
Well, Cynthia, our goal is to build a substantial business network in order to achieve critical mass, as I mentioned earlier, and put pressure on the other players to raise their compliance standards to par with those of KAKI members. We also plan to use the information gathered from the private sector to support governments in identifying problems areas associated with the delivery of public services that pose corruption risk and assisting them in coming up with solutions that might lessen those risks. And KAKI will also increase the number of businesses in its network, attract more business associations, and establish official collaboration with Indonesian officials like KPK, Financial Services Authority, Indonesian Stock Exchange, and Director General of Tax. In order to engage more diverse companies in various sectors, we would like to run more workshops for businesses to make anti-corruption training available in the private sector, and hopefully at no cost. Yeah. Along with the expanding KAKI for large corporations, we also want to work with the Ministry of Cooperatives and small and medium enterprises to create new initiatives for SMEs. And the KAKI standards will be streamlined to better suit the needs of SMEs. More Indonesian businesses, in our opinion, are presently eager to develop and implement anti-corruption program, but they are unable, sorry, to do so due to a lack of resources and expertise. So we will pay attention to the worries and recommendations of the business communities and offer them answers to improve the business climate in Indonesia. So, Cynthia, we are confident that KAKI will serve as a benchmark and a guide for Indonesian private sectors looking looking to adopt anti-corruption and anti-bribery standards in their daily operations under the guidance of CIPE. This is only the beginning. We will certainly require further assistance from a variety of stakeholders, but I trust we are in excellent hands right now, and I have every confidence that KAKI will succeed and accomplish even more progress toward establishing an environment in Indonesia in which doing business is free from corruption.
So, Pak Erry, I wanted to zero in on one dimension of KAKI's work, and that is, in my experience, business, especially big business, it's quite profitable with the status quo and happy. It's often very difficult to incentivize them to change and to adopt a new program. So as you approach Indonesian businesses and try to get them to join the KAKI initiative, what arguments do you make? How do you convince them that it's in their interest to do this?
Well, one of them is, oh, come on, guys, we are going to global. Going global needs a transparency, needs a good corporate governance, need a commitment to anti-bribery management systems. Because why? Because, for example, if we go to England, there is a UK bribery acts. If you go to US, there is FCPA, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. So in order to go there, then we have to have the highest standards of anti-corruption. That is one. Number two, um, how to motivate them to join KAKI is that if you want your company is secured, let us guarantee that our company applied consistently a good corporate governance in which integrity and ethics are the two main foundations of those systems. By doing that, so you can prevent your companies from convicted as companies corruption. But is one of your executives doing corruption, then the company could be secured. But that person or that personnel, well, the law will be what you call that, say differently to to that person only, but not only, but not to the company. I think those two for what we will call that, among other things, on how to motivate companies to join KAKI.
So, one of the really tempting things for us at CIPE to do in Asia, and this perhaps is a question to Cynthia as well, one of the really tempting things is to take the success of KAKI in Jakarta in such a large and complex and difficult and significant market, take that success and push it out elsewhere in the world. And so my question to you, Pak Erry, and perhaps to you as well, Cynthia, is what what elements of the KAKI program are unique to Indonesia, and which ones are more broadly applicable globally to any country in principle?
Well, I think number one is the sharing experience events. Maybe we have to make that more often and internally as well as internationally, uh, to share experience of those companies in combating corruption internally in their companies as well as when we face the bureaucracies or other parties. That's number one. Number two, um, well, we had a meeting with a leading young president organization, which leads quite big companies in Indonesia, and their complaints is always, "Come on, Barry, the corruption is very difficult to eradicate. How can we do that? What is the role that we can do uh, from our side, because the level of corruption is too deep and too wide." And I always respond to that question by saying that, okay, we admit that reality, but we cannot do just complain. So what we have to do is we gather and we share experience, and then we formulate how to combat corruption from our side with communication with public sectors as well as other stakeholders. I think that is one. That is two. What do you call that? Action that we can do, Frank.
And Pak, that's super interesting and useful. We're coming to the end of the podcast, but Cynthia, I wanted to give you a quick chance to answer the question. And again, the question is, what elements of KAKI are globally applicable, and which ones are unique to Indonesia, from your point of view, sitting in Malaysia next door?
Well, my work so far has been very much to also talk about the success of KAKI, because it is a very good case study, a good example for countries like Malaysia, Cambodia, Philippines, etc., to emulate how a coalition working on anti-corruption in private sector uh, work can actually provide a platform for private sector and corporates to come together. And I believe that corporates probably feel that they may have a bigger voice with the government when they speak out together. If they want better standards, better harmonizing of rules and regulations, that they speak together. And that whole point about sustainability, the point about ESG, looking at governance around environmental concerns and crimes are becoming so big and so real today that I actually think, Pa Erry, part of our vision together is to do something in ASEAN, that we can actually combine countries' efforts together, and you can actually showcase the good work of KAKI at the ASEAN level. And there's no better time than now when Indonesia is the chair of ASEAN for at least this coming period. So I see a lot of possibilities and a lot of potential ideas that can be implemented, and we should just find ways to strengthen the platform and doing further work from all the good work that you're already carrying out at this moment.
After the anti-corruption, yes, you're right that our challenges is ESG, environment, social, and compliance. Compliance is okay. Anti-corruption, good corporate governance. That is the compliance. But the other two is environment and social. Environment, transition, green economy, and so forth. That's another challenges. That could also be our ammunition in order to mobilize and to gather all as much private sector as we can, and among others is to together speak up together to the government to harmonizing policies and the business interest. So I agree with Cynthia. There are many issues that we can hand in hand do it together in order to more effectively campaigning how important coalition action against corruption.
So this is a great way to end the podcast. Thank you, Pa Erry. Thank you, Cynthia. And this is a wonderful way to end the podcast, to sort of look big at the future and a multi-country regional effort around the success that KAKI has enjoyed so far. So on behalf of the Anti-Corruption and Governance Center and the Democracy That Delivers podcast, I'd like to thank today's co-host, Cynthia Gabriel, who's joining us from Kuala Lumpur. She's a senior anti-corruption advisor with the ACGC team, which I'm the head of. And especially thank our guest today, Pa Erry Riyana Hardjapamekas, who is the chairman of KAKI. And KAKI, of course, stands for the Private Sector Collective Action Coalition Against Corruption. It's based in Jakarta, Indonesia. So Pa Erry and Cynthia, thank you so much for joining us today. Until we meet again.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Frank. Thank you, Pa Erry.
Thank you, Desi.
Listen and subscribe to CIPE's Democracy That Delivers, wherever you get your podcasts.